Guten Morgen an alle Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer unseres heutigen Webinars. Vielen Dank, dass Sie sich die Zeit für uns nehmen. Mein Name ist Uwe Hering, Marketing Programs Manager bei InterSystems in Darmstadt. Ich freue mich, Sie heute wieder als Moderator durch ein Webinar führen zu dürfen. Der heutige Webcast unserer Reihe InterSystems TechTalk hat das Thema Web-App-Entwicklung mit InterSystems IRIS zum Inhalt. Entsprechend lautet der Titel des heutigen Webinars Moderne Webanwendungen entwickeln mit InterSystems IRIS. Unser Referent Shubham Sumalya wird uns in diesem ersten von 2 Webcasts die wesentlichen Komponenten moderner Web-Applikationen vorstellen, uns in die Entwicklung von RESTful APIs mit InterSystems IRIS einführen und aufzeigen, wie das Frontend via REST mit dem InterSystems IRIS-Backend verbunden wird. Zudem wird er uns wertvolle Tipps und Tricks aus seinem Entwicklernähkästchen an die Hand geben. An dieser Stelle ein kurzer Hinweis. Shubham lernt ganz fleißig seit vielen Monaten Deutsch und ist auch wirklich sehr, sehr, sehr gut schon geworden. Dennoch wird er das Webinar in englischer Sprache abhalten. Dazu haben wir uns entschieden, damit Shubham seiner technischen Expertise freien Lauf lassen kann. Hallo Shubham, du bist ja schon seit vielen Jahren als Webentwickler unterwegs. Was ist aus deiner Sicht die einschneidendste Veränderung der letzten Jahre? And please feel free to answer in English.
Thank you for the intro of this webinar. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. I'm Shubham, as Uwe said, a sales engineer at InterSystems Doc. You asked a very interesting question, Uwe. What is the most disruptive change in recent years? Well, the first one I would like to mention is progressive web apps. In the past, web applications differed from native mobile apps because they often lacked offline functionalities or push notifications. These days, progressive web apps blur the line between web and mobile apps, offering features like offline access, push notifications, and the ability to install the app on a user's home screen. The second change I would like to mention is the widespread adoption of REST. REST has become the de facto standard for web APIs. It is widely used by companies like Google, Twitter, and Facebook to make their services accessible to developers and third-party applications. With REST, API design shifted toward creating simple, resource-oriented services that can be easily consumed by a wide range of clients, including web browsers, mobile apps, and other services. RESTful APIs have become the backbone of modern web development, allowing complex distributed applications to be easily built.
Okay, thank you, Shubham. That makes sense. Ich weiß ja schon, dass Shubham in diesem Webinar auch explizit auf REST eingehen wird. Deshalb freue ich mich schon auf deine Ausführungen dazu. Bevor es nun aber gleich losgeht, noch einmal ganz kurz einige logistische Details. Wie immer haben wir Sie nämlich stumm geschaltet, um den Ablauf des Webinars nicht durch unbeabsichtigte Nebengeräusche zu stören. Sie können aber jederzeit gern Ihre Fragen in das Fragen- und Antwort-Widget eingeben, das sich zum Start des Webinars rechts neben dem Fenster mit Shubhams PowerPoint-Folien befinden sollte. Wir werden dann am Ende des Webinars die gestellten Fragen wie gewohnt beantworten. Das heißt, ich werde die Fragen an Shubham stellen und Shubham wird sie auf Englisch beantworten. Sie können Ihre Fragen aber gern in einer der beiden Sprachen oder auch Spanisch an mich richten. Und nutzen Sie gern die Q&A-Funktion auch dann, wenn Sie technische Schwierigkeiten mit unserer Webinar-Software haben sollten. Ja, damit aber auch genug der Vorrede. Shubham, bitte leg los.
Thanks, Uwe. We will look into a very short presentation and then go to the demo. Let us first understand what are the main components of modern web applications. The modern web application consists of 3 main components: the front end, the back end, and the database. Front end is the user-facing side of a web application. It is normally what you see on your browser when you type in a domain name. The front end is responsible for user interactions. In modern web applications, generally the front end is developed in JavaScript using JavaScript frameworks like Vue.js, React.js, and Angular. The backend code is written in various programming languages such as Python, Node.js, Java, ObjectScript, etc. The database is the memory where we store our data and access it when needed. The backend provides REST endpoints using which front-end sends various kind of requests to the backend and receives response in return. Today, we'll see how InterSystems IRIS helps us create super fast REST APIs and how is it used to connect to the front end. We'll use ObjectScript as a choice of programming language. Well, we hear a lot of terms in the realm of web applications: REST, RESTful, and REST API. All of these sound familiar. Let's have a closer look in demystifying them. REST is a set of principles that define how web standards such as HTTP should be used to create scalable and flexible web services. Or we can say that it is an architectural style for designing networked applications. As you can see, the REST stands for representational state transfer, but the question is, why these specific words? Well, it was carefully chosen by Roy Fielding in his 2000 doctoral dissertation to describe a particular architectural style for building distributed systems, especially web services. Each word in the term has a specific meaning that reflects a core concept of this architecture. Representational. The term representational refers to the fact that the client interacts with resources through representations of those resources rather than the resources themselves. In REST, a resource is any object or data that can be addressed. For example, a resource might be a document, a user, a piece of media, or any other entity that a client might want to work with. Representation. So when a client requests a resource, the server sends back a representation of that resource. The representation could be in various formats, such as JSON, XML, HTML, etc. The representation is a snapshot of the current state of the resource at that time of the request. For example, if you request a user profile resource, the server might send back a JSON representation of that profile. State in this context refers to the state of the application or resource. In a RESTful system, the client and the server maintain their own states independently. The client manages the state of the application. For example, it might remember which page of data it is viewing or which filters it has applied. This state is maintained on the client side. Resource state. This refers to the current state or data associated with a resource on the server. When the server sends a representation of a resource to the client, it represents the state of that resource at a specific moment in time. And transfer of state. Every interaction between client and server involves the transfer of the current state of a resource. The client can modify the state by making requests to the server, like updating data, creating new resources, and the server will respond with a new representation that reflects the updated state. The transfer part of the term refers to the transfer of resource representations between client and server over a network, typically using the HTTP protocol. In REST, communication between the client and server is based on stateless transfers of data. That means each request from the client to the server must contain all the information necessary to understand and process the request without relying on any stored context on the server. This stateless ensures that each interaction is independent, making the system scalable and easier to manage. So we already saw what is REST, and now let's talk about why we use the term RESTful. RESTful is an adjective that describes web services that adhere to the principles of REST. If an API or web service is referred to as RESTful, it means that the service follows the REST architectural style. This includes using HTTP methods to interact with resources. For example, get to retrieve data, post to create data, and then for maintaining statelessness and ensuring that the URIs are well defined and consistent. A RESTful service typically returns data in formats like JSON or XML and uses standard HTTP status codes like 200 for success, 404 for not found, 500 for server errors to indicate the result of a request, basically. And then REST API. API stands for Application Programming Interface, is an interface that allows clients to interact with a RESTful web service. It provides a set of endpoints or URIs that clients can use to perform operations on resources. Each endpoint corresponds to a specific resource or a collection of resources, and each resource can be manipulated using standard HTTP methods. So what are the components of this REST API if we talk overall? First thing is resources. These are the main entities that the API manages, typically represented as JSON. For example, in a REST API for a list of available cars, resources could include brand, price, and user reviews. And then the other component would be the URI itself, the unique identifiers for each resource. For example, if we have a URI, HTTPS localhost IRIS/car rental get all cars, let's say, this might represent only the car details, but not the type of insurances one can subscribe to. And then there are some HTTP methods which we can use. For example, here it's get, which is basically to retrieve data from the server, but there are a few more. For example, post to create a new resource on the server, put, update an existing resource on the server, delete, removing a resource from the server, and so on. And then there is another component, which are headers. Headers are basically metadata that we send with the request or response, such as content type and so on. And then, as I already discussed before, some status codes like 200 for OK, 201 for created, 400 for bad request, and so on, that the server responds, right? Okay, so now that we already saw what is REST and then RESTful and REST APIs and so on, let's talk about how to create REST API on IRIS. Well, there are several ways how one can create a REST API in IRIS. One of the ways to start coding from the scratch. Another interesting way to create REST APIs in IRIS is to send the specification of your desired REST API to IRIS on a predefined REST endpoint that generates all the necessary files along with the basic skeleton code. The specification is sent in JSON as specified by Swagger or OpenAPI standards for describing RESTful APIs. When IRIS receives this specification, it generates 3 files, which are specification class, dispatch class, and implementation class. Normally, we edit the implementation class to add business logic. Let us dive into a demo now. where we'll create a REST API in IRIS, and then we'll use our front end to interact with the APIs. The scenario for this demo is that we will develop a small example of car rental service application. For that, we would want a front end that lets the user see the list of available cars, car details, and customer reviews. Naturally, we'll also need a backend that will provide REST endpoints where the front end will make requests for the resources. We'll create the backend REST APIs in IRIS. These endpoints will receive requests to add a new car in the inventory by storing the car details in IRIS database, or to add multiple user reviews, and then also to extract the car details from the database to give it to the front end. The front end is built using Vue.js framework. So the main steps to create the application are as follows. Number one, we'll create the specification of our API, as already discussed, and send it to IRIS. For this, we'll use Postman. And Postman is an API development and testing tool. These kind of tools are specifically designed to facilitate the creation, testing, documentation, and monitoring of APIs. This will make IRIS generate the necessary files such as spec class, implementation class, and dispatch class. Then we'll go to IRIS management portal to create a web application. And then we'll insert the business logic about what should our backend do when a request has arrived on a REST endpoint. Before integrating it to the front end, we'll also test our APIs using Postman. So this is my IDE VS Code. I've created a local folder car rentals, and then I've placed my front-end code that I've built on Vue.js, another folder backend, which is empty currently, and we'll soon have the backend related code there. Now let me open Postman that I'm using to generate REST API in the specification first way. In the URL field, you can see that it contains the namespace and the folder name. What it means is that IRIS will be contacted on this predefined endpoint. It will look into the specifications, and then it will generate all the necessary class files in the same namespace and folder name we have mentioned in the URL. To have a detailed look on the URL, please visit our documentation. We'll also put the link in our video description. In the body section, you can see that I'm defining the structure of the endpoints in JSON format as described by Swagger. /add car is supposed to take a few parameters related to a new car and create one for us. Further down in the JSON, there are endpoints like add review and get all cars that I wish to generate. Now let's send the post request to IRIS and see what happens. As you can see, we received a response that new application car rental is created. Okay, now let's move to VS Code that is connected to our IRIS instance and check if car rental folder is present there. Maybe I need to refresh it. We can see that car rental folder is created, and it contains 3 generated files from our specification. Those are disp class, imp class, and spec class. If we look into spec class, it is exactly what we had sent through Postman. The implementation class should contain the business logic. Here we see that there are generated functions which are empty at the moment. Once the endpoint is called, these functions will be executed. And the third one is dispatch class that has auto-generated code here. You can see that it contains route information that was generated. We normally do not make changes here and write our logic here in the implementation class. Let's first export the code from IRIS server to our local folder backend, where we can edit the code and add our logic. As you can see, that code is exported, and we'll make changes to our implementation class here. First, let's go to Management Portal in IRIS and create our web application here. I'll navigate from System Administration to Security to Application to Web Application. Here we'll click on Create New Web Application and then put the name /car rental. And then select the right namespace here. And then another thing we need to do is to provide the name of our dispatch class, that is car rental.disp, and then we'll click on Save. All right, let's go back to our VS Code where we'll create another folder, utility class, inside our backend folder. Then let's define a class car.class that will contain all the required properties we need our car to have. Then let's create another class that is review.class, where we'll put the code for defining the properties of our review object. Then let's save these two files and then let us do an import and compile. This will pull the code in IRIS and compile it. Once these files are saved and compiled, let's go to our implementation class and write our business logic of what to do. Let me quickly add my code for adding car method here. The idea is to receive the parameters sent in the REST call and create an object of type car, and then populate those fields. Then let's add code for adding a new review in the method adding review that enables us to add more reviews using REST calls. And finally, we edit the class method getAllCars. This method will run SQL query and return us the list of all the cars we have created in our database. So let's put our newly defined REST endpoint to test using Postman. We'll here send a request to the IRIS endpoint to add a new car. We'll add some car details here, and then we'll send this post request. We see that the response from IRIS is a status key with value 1, which means the new car has added successfully. We then quickly move to IRIS Management Portal, where we can actually query the IRIS database using SQL to verify if we have a new entry for cars here. You can locate utilities.car table here, which has exactly one entry that we just now added here. And we had defined another endpoint add review. This was supposed to take car name, customer name, and their rating and review, and then add that to our car that was created earlier with add car endpoint. Let's add one more with name John and add a review saying comfortable ride. When we press send, we receive the message in response that says review was added successfully. Without any delay, we can also just check our third endpoint, that is get all cars, where we can see the newly created car and also all the reviews that were added to this car. It's time for us to connect our front end to IRIS via REST. This is a small example of a car rental service. It's a web page. It's called Enterprise. That's the example name of our car rental service company. However, we don't see any car yet. We'll have to go to our Vue.js code and then add the logic to get all the cars here and to show it in the web page on our browser. So this is our JavaScript code for the front end. In the function getCars, we'll add logic to make the REST call to IRIS. We have used a JavaScript library, Axios, here. And you can see that the endpoint is the same that we were using on Postman. Let's save and compile this code, and let's go to our browser to see if we can see the result. We can see that the car we had added, Acura, shows up here. If you were wondering, the car image is stored in our front end. We want to see some more details, like who posted the review and what was the rating from each of them. Basically, for this, we'll go back to our JavaScript code and add logic to another function, getCarsReviews, which is making call to the same endpoint, but this time extracting reviews from it and populating a new card when we click on our car Acura. So as soon as we'll click on the car image here, it will trigger the JavaScript function getCarsReviews that we just now added. And you can see here in the bottom that names, ratings, and reviews are extracted and shown here with some front-end styling. Okay, so far we can see there is just one car in our inventory. Let's add one more and see if that also appears here automatically. We'll quickly go to the Postman to our add car endpoint and add a new car detail here. Let's say the name would be Alfa Romeo. Name of the image is Alfa Romeo.png. And also let's edit this review from a customer, Patty, who says that the mileage was low. Let's send this info to IRIS. We have a positive response that the new car was added. Also in the front end, when we refresh our page, it triggers the function getAllCars that will return 2 cars this time. And by the way, we can also go in the developer tools that is provided by browser. And we can look for getAllCars endpoint, and we can see that it was called, and in the response, there is the entire JSON data for both the cars. So that was a short example of how to develop RESTful web applications on IRIS. Should you have questions regarding this topic, I'll be happy to help you out with that. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you again.
Oh, es tut mir leid, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, anscheinend war mein Headset nicht richtig eingestellt. Deshalb nochmal ganz kurz, vielen Dank an dich, Shubham, für deine Erläuterung. Wir wissen jetzt, wie sich Front- und Backend über REST-APIs besonders leicht miteinander verbinden lassen, wenn man InterSystems IRIS einsetzt. In 2 Wochen wirst du uns dann an das wichtige Thema Sicherheit heranführen. Dabei wird es um unterschiedliche Authentifizierungsmethoden gehen, besonders aber um OAuth 2.0. Darüber hinaus wirst du uns erklären, wie sich Authentifizierungstools von Drittanbietern wie zum Beispiel Google oder Microsoft mit InterSystems IRIS nutzen lassen. Wir würden uns sehr freuen, wenn Sie am 17. September um 11 Uhr wieder mit dabei sind. Nun wollen wir aber erst einmal das heutige Webinar aufarbeiten und auf Ihre Fragen eingehen. Shubham, ich fange mit einer einfachen Frage an, die gestellt wurde. Kann man auch Bilder über REST-Calls übermitteln?
Yes, I mean, an image is considered binary data because it is composed of a series of bytes that represents the image's pixel data, for example, color information and possibly metadata. Unlike text, which can be stored and read as plain characters, an image data is not directly human readable. It is stored in a format that computers can understand, which is a binary format. This means that the image file contains raw data that must be processed by software to convert it into a visual representation for humans. But this binary data needs to be transmitted, and over a communication protocol that might not be binary safe or that expects textual data. So we use base64 encoding that transforms the binary data into a text representation, which can be easily transmitted over text-based protocols like HTTP.
Okay, danke schön, Shubham. Next question, and I'll ask it in English to be more in line with what your answers sound like. What is a CORS error, Shubham, and how do you handle that in InterSystems IRIS?
Yeah, I mean, CORS policy and error is something which I think every web developer goes through. And it is basically CORS stand for cross-origin resource sharing. And it's basically a security feature which is implemented in web browsers. I mean that web browsers, either depending on your CORS policy, web browsers allow or restrict web pages from making requests to a different domain. For example, for example, if there is your web page is in one domain, let's say example.com, and it tries to request resources, such as APIs or images or scripts from another domain, which is, let's say, API-example.com, then without CORS policy in place, these requests would be blocked by the browser. So what do we need to do is that the server or the API needs to tell browser that, hey, I'm okay with cross-origin requests, and I'll allow you that. And that so the server needs to send this information in response to let the browser know that you can allow these requests. And it's pretty simple. In IRIS, we can define it as a key value pair. For example, if we want to say that get all cars should be a CORS permitted endpoint, we would use x ISC CORS is equal to true, a key pair in our JSON, and that will let IRIS know that please allow CORS request to this endpoint. Or we could also just use another small piece of code that lets the entire API CORS enabled. So there are ways, if you want to have the entire API to be CORS enabled, you could use it, or you could deploy this rule for the entire API, or you could also define on each endpoint level if you would want this endpoint to be CORS enabled. Yeah, well.
Okay, thank you, Shubham. Next question for you, and an interesting one for that. How many concurrent users can make REST requests, and how are REST calls licensed in InterSystems IRIS?
Yeah, good question. Actually, number of users depend on how many users were provided to you in your license. However, each user can make up to 12 concurrent calls. And there is additional 13 concurrent calls allowed per user, but after that, it will need license for more than 25 users, else it will throw a license limit exceeded error. On the other hand, if you have a core-based license for IRIS, it is independent of number of users. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Shubham. Next question. What happens when you change the specification as an afterthought? Is IRIS able to generate the code for the expansions only, or do we have to start from scratch?
No, actually, you could just update your specification and IRIS preserves whatever you had previously and brings this particular change into it. So basically, you don't have to do anything from scratch. It is updating the specification.
That sounds promising. Thank you, Shubham. There's one more question. So, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, wenn Sie noch Fragen haben, bitte gerne in das Fragen- und Antwort-Panel oder in den Chat stellen. Ansonsten wäre das jetzt die letzte Frage. Are there any plans to implement GraphQL in InterSystems IRIS, Shubham? And if you don't know,
yeah, I think I wouldn't be the right guy at this point. I'm not aware of it, and I think I'll forward this request to one of my senior colleagues who will get back with this answer.
Ja, also mir sind auch keine dahingehenden Pläne jetzt zumindest kurzfristig bekannt. Wir werden dem aber nachgehen und mit dem Product Management sprechen und Ihnen das dann per E-Mail mitteilen. Gut, also wenn jetzt keine weiteren Fragen mehr kommen, dann darf ich mich jetzt bei Ihnen, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer, für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit bedanken natürlich. Und besonders bei dir, lieber Shubham, für deine Ausführungen. Gerne stehen wir, und damit meine ich in erster Linie den Kollegen Shubham, im Nachgang dieses Webinars für weitere Informationen oder Fragen zur Verfügung. Wenden Sie sich bitte einfach an Ihre InterSystems Ansprechpartner oder schreiben Sie uns eine E-Mail an info@intersystems.com. Natürlich können Sie uns unter 06151 17470 auch gern telefonisch kontaktieren. Jetzt ist doch noch eine Frage hereingekommen. Are there any predefined interfaces for Fire or AI? Shubham.
I am not sure what is meant by predefined interface for AI. But again, Fire is something which is healthcare related, and I would like to look into it and then answer the question over email, if that's possible.
Of course. Also wir werden auch diese Frage dann im Nachgang beantworten. Vielen Dank aber für die guten Fragen. Damit würde ich sagen, beschließen wir unser heutiges Webinar. Nochmals danke für Ihre Zeit und Aufmerksamkeit. Und am 17. September werden wir Sie hoffentlich hier wiedersehen, wenn Shubham uns berichtet, wie Sie Ihre Web-Apps bestmöglich vor unberechtigtem Zugriff schützen können. Im Sinne, alles Gute, bleiben Sie uns wohlgesonnen, vor allem aber bleiben Sie gesund. Auf Wiederhören. Tschüss, Shubham.
Ciao.